Yeah.
Are you close to living? Right there. I already stepped on her toe. Literally. And I pointed you out. I didn't tell her. I just said you were looking. Right. How about putting your thing right there? Yeah. You don't roll later the cake without here.
We're gonna drive up.
I just wanted to keep you.
I don't know. I think.
April.
Gotta meet everybody in there. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, yeah. Good. John, thank you for zooming in this morning. And it's always a good day when Doug is here with his missus. And so glad we're having a little potluck today that got worked out. And thank you all the ladies for handling that. I can't call you girls anymore. I was chastised for that. So thank you, ladies, for doing that. We will not delay any longer unless, Marge, you have something you want to tell us or share with us.
Well, yes, I was looking for Michael's name. That was important because he couldn't remember it, where it was.
Michael's name is, he's the tallest guy in Chattanooga, so.
We don't have a lot of visitors here, do we? Where? Oh, somebody that doesn't want to be pointed out.
Yeah.
Well, okay, you did it. What's her name?
That's Grace.
And
That's my daughter.
I figured.
It's my favorite
They-
daughter.
Oh dear, Stacy's daughter, Grace. And, there's a gal by the name of April here. Would you like to just claim her? Oh, yeah, April, my daughter.
She flew in yesterday
Her favorite daughter.
from San Diego. She took a red eye. She arrived at the house at 9 a.m. and she picked up by a brother and they couldn't find Wayne and I. So they finally found Wayne behind the house. This morning. No, yesterday morning. Yesterday morning. But it was so funny because they came to the kitchen door. They walked all through the house and I knew she was coming. Dwayne didn't.
Since we're embarrassing people, the only news people I can remember is Linda Palomino. How can you forget Linda Palomino? Thank you, Linda, for coming.
But April's from San Diego. Welcome. Thank you.
We are studying Jacob, which I'm really enjoying. And I won't say anything else about that, and we will get started. Roy, would you have our prayer, please?
Loving Father in heaven, hearts are filled with joy today. We ask, Lord, that we can worship in truth and spirit, that we will learn today things that will help us prepare for Savior's second coming. Lord, we thank you for all of our many friends. How we can spend together. We pray in Jesus' name.
I guess that's God telling us we're late. We need to get started.
Grace and April, I'm guessing that you must be here for Mother's Day.
She lives here.
Oh, okay, well,
Meet me here by 5 years. She went to Southern.
I'm curious, how many in this room have mothers who are still living? I do not, I can't think. Less than half. If you have not already made a plan to give your mother a call for Mother's Day, please do that. Think about that. Privileged to have a mother still living, and Mother's Day is a nice opportunity to let them know how much we appreciate them. I thought about doing that. And to those of you who are mothers here, we express on behalf of society what you have done to help create a better world, the way that you have raised your kids. We are in the book of Genesis. If you'd open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 28. Ken did a really marvelous job of getting this story started for us last week and setting up the story. Today, we're going to look, and I'm sorry to erase this because it's such a good thing on the board, but I'm going to write some things on the board. Thank you for the reminder to love our neighbors ourselves. Today, we're looking at two big ideas. And it's the intersection of these two big things: grace, accountability. And I'm going to ask us to reflect on that for just a little bit before we jump into our story. And we're going to do that through about 5 minutes of conversation with somebody sitting near you. May I see the hands of those whose birth year is an even year? I was born in 1956, so that means I'm an even year. Okay? Even years, okay? Up high. And I'm assuming the rest of you are odd years. Great power of deduction here. Okay, here's what I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask that those with an even year, like me, focus on the word accountability. Now, what I'm talking about with accountability is consequences, and stepping into those consequences when you have made your bed, you lie in it. You are held accountable sometimes by the people, but sometimes just life circumstances hold you accountable for the stuff you've done, for good or bad. That's what I'm thinking about with accountability. Grace is in some ways kind of the opposite of that. It's when you get what you don't deserve. You have been doing 10 miles over the speed limit, and you get pulled over and you end up with a warning instead of a ticket. That's grace. You end up with a ticket, that's accountability. Okay? So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Now, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to talk with 2 or 3 people around you, and I want to make sure that you have both an even year and an odd year. So you have somebody representing grace, which is the odd year, birth years, accountability, which is the even years. So make sure you have somebody in both. And I want the people who are focusing on accountability to make a case for this. We need accountability in the world. And I want you to make your case for that in this conversation. And you might even think about, what would it be like if there was no accountability? For example, if police never gave tickets, if they always gave you warnings, what would it be like if there were no accountability? What if when you didn't show up to work and you did sloppy work, your boss never said anything? And what if there was never any accountability? What would it be like to live in a world with no accountability? So I want those of you who are even years to make the case for accountability. That's what the rest of you are going to be doing. You're going to be making your case for grace. What if we lived in a world where there was no grace? Why do we need grace? Don't just keep it to the religious realm. Think about relationships and the way that society functions. Got your task? Even birth years, making the case for accountability. Odd birth years, making the case for grace. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes or less. I'll walk around and make sure that, the conversation is still staying strong. And we may cut it off a little bit shorter if it degenerates into the weather. Okay, find 1 or 2 people, no more than 3 people. So no groups, no larger than 4. Find 1 or 2 people. Make sure that you have somebody representing both of these positions. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to talk about why both of these are important.
Accountability, the first thing I do. Yeah, Grace and the God.
Yeah, it's fun. It's accountability. I accountability. Others.
This is my knowledge.
When I get that, I take
1 minute warning. Talk about in 1 minute.
conservative versus the liberal.
I know.
It seems to be.
I stopped the other day running 87,
88.
88, with her and my daughter and grandson. Granddaughter.
Back up this way.
Said, maybe I'll give you the ring. Just go on. 18 miles. I didn't have.
May I have your attention? Back up this way.
I guess you did have that.
I'm glad to see you enjoying your conversation. Good. I know that not everybody is comfortable speaking up in a large group, but when we have an exercise like this, it gives even people who aren't comfortable speaking to the large group an opportunity to speak up if they want to. So tell me, what did you hear? What did you say about the value of these two qualities in our world, grace and accountability? Let me hear from you.
I have a story about my son when he was probably 3 years old. Stopped at a gas station.
Can everybody hear?
No.
Story about
Use your.
3-year-old son.
Okay, now I'm mad at y'all.
Sorry.
When my
Grace.
son was about 3, I stopped at a gas station. And back in those days, I'm sure y'all remember this, they had candy and gum and that kind of stuff at the racks. So I get in the car to leave and he says, "Want some gum, Mom?" I'm like, "Where did you get the gum?" He says, "Back there." I said, "Did you pay for it?" "Oh." I said, "Well, honey, when you take something and you don't pay for it, it's called stealing. Now we have to go back and you have to give it back to the man so that you didn't know you were stealing it." And he was so embarrassed. He's like, "Mom, can you do it for me?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't steal it. You did. You have to do it." But I wasn't mad at him because he was 3. He didn't know any better. I made him understand you have to have accountability for what you do. And
Nice
I
story.
showed him grace because he was 3.
Thank you, thank you. Somebody else, what did you hear? What did you say? Right.
One of the things that we said is that you need love for grace and accountability.
Ah, you need love for both.
That was my story.
Somebody else? We got 2 here.
You've got to find the balance. If you have too much, like you said, a world with all you do is give everybody a ticket, you don't take into the fact that maybe they just lost their mother, or they're rushing to the hospital, or there's extenuating. That wouldn't be good, but if you had well, there's no police, everybody just do what that would be chaos.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a balance.
Gordon.
I think of it as, in this world, for the second coming, accountability is crucial. We could not survive without it. Now, accountability with some grace is ideal. That grace is tempered in this world.
Balance, temporary, we got 2 comments over here.
I have a question.
Yes.
In your background in education, hold your students accountable? Or did you give them grace and just give them all A's?
Yeah, and I think, thank you for, the answer is no. I did not just give them all A's. And I think of a time when I caught two people in a flagrant cheating situation. And the conversation I had with them, I'll tell you a couple stories maybe a little bit later, but you're right. As an educator, and specifically with my most recent job that I just retired from, I was the discipline enforcer on campus. And how do you blend these two together? Yeah.
So either extreme is dangerous.
Yep.
The challenge is, how do you lead which way, this way or that way in the middle?
And is it always the same? Is it one size fits all for every situation, for every person? Any other comments? Did I miss anybody? Please.
One of the things I mentioned was that grace is really only effective for people who know they don't deserve it. If they expect I'm getting grace.
Yes.
You now just have unaccountability.
Catch that? That's a really good insight. Well put. Thanks. I almost called you Rex. It was so funny. I haven't done that for years.
Yeah, I could be offended.
Okay. His brother is Rex. We all went to school together. But thanks, Mike. That's really good. Please, John.
I'm very thankful that the Lord decided to take wickedness that I had to grow up with on himself and relieve me of it.
Yes.
That is grace.
It is that when God takes on himself consequences that we accrued. Did I miss anybody else? Please.
Grace is the power of God working in us.
Yes.
You can't do it any other way.
Grace is not something weak and passive. It's powerful. Quick story. And I would love to tell you this story in more detail, but it's the point of it, I think I can do fairly quickly. Our son, in probably about grade 10, committed a felony. And it happened through childish irresponsibility, flying back from a mission trip of all things. He and his buddies got joking around, and it ended up in him stuffing a life preserver into his backpack. He was older than 3. And he did know the meaning of the word steal, but somehow anyway, the way that kids' minds work, he didn't think of it that, they throw the pillows away here and the blankets and who knows. Long story short, and I'd gone down to the Atlanta airport to pick him up. All the kids that were riding home with us back to Chattanooga came, no Stephen. I said, where's Stephen? Well, he's talking to somebody. He ended up talking to the head of security of the Atlanta airport. That's a big guy. And got him down. We talked for an hour. First question he asked him, he says, tell me about your family. Stephen kind of hung his, well, my dad's a preacher. What was that? My dad's a preacher. The conversation went on from there. Today, Stephen is a successful, law-abiding citizen, dad of 2, doing well. But if he had a felony, his life would have been very different. And this man held Stephen's fate in his hand at that moment. And I think he was weighing what he was going to do during this hour-long conversation. Asking Stephen a lot of good questions. And finally he said to him, tell you what, I do not want to see a young man your age have a felony starting off before you can get to college. I think that you've got some good stuff ahead of you, and I would hate to see a felony get in the way of that. He said, I want you to make me a promise. I want you to talk this over with your dad the very first thing that you can. So here was a 2-hour ride back, and I didn't know any of this at the time. 2-hour ride back from the airport, and all the other kids are chatting, and then they one by one go to sleep. Stephen's sitting in the front seat. Later I look back, rather nervous. We had just dropped off the last person. He turns to me and says, Dad, we've got to talk. I saw what that man did as this incredible combination of grace and accountability. He could have thrown the book at Stephen. He held him accountable, but he also gave him grace. What we're looking at today in the story of Jacob is how God dealt with Jacob with both offering of grace and holding him accountable. And I want to learn from this story as much as we can, because in our lives, sometimes it seems as though all we're getting is the stuff that we have brought on ourselves or stuff that other people have brought on us. And it feels like accountability plus. We're just getting stuff piled on. Or we kind of get really hard on ourselves saying, I am reaping the consequences of a lot of stupid choices and now they're all coming to find me. Where's God's grace in that? How do we find God's grace in that? And this story has much on this topic. One other thing before we jump into it. I think I mentioned this to you at some point, that Jacob's life has more detail over more period of time. We meet him when he is very, very young, and we trace him all the way till his death. There's very few people in the Bible that we have that much information on. David probably being the primary exception. We know a lot about Jacob. Now, remember what his name was changed to? Israel. Think about the fact that all believers are called what? Children of Israel. There's a sense in which the reason this story is given us so much detail, it's an archetypal story for every believer. This is our story. And so as we understand things about Jacob, we understand more about how God is at work in our lives. And that's the real reason we're going to look at this, because we say, how do I see God at work in what appears to be sometimes random stuff in my life, or me just being washed away by all of the consequences of stupid things I've done? How do I see God at work? Let's jump into the story, and we'll pick up with where Ken left off last week in Genesis chapter 28. We got right up to Jacob's ladder and then stopped. So we're going to read that. And we're going to move through 4 stories. The first one, where'd my blue marker go? The first one is going to be Jacob's ladder. Then we'll have 2, 3, 4. I didn't leave myself enough room because I want to write some stuff. Let's erase this. You know what our topic is. Give ourselves more room at the top of the board. We've got ladder, which really is a staircase. It's a mistranslation. We've called it Jacob's ladder so long that it seemed funny to sing, "We are climbing Jacob's stairway." It's really more of a stairway. Jacob's ladder, and we'll go on to 3 and then 4. We're going to look at each of these stories for some of the details, but all of this is driving toward understanding grace and accountability and how God is at work in our lives. Let's read it. Genesis chapter 28, starting with verse 10. And how many of you were here last week? And for those of you who were not, Jacob has just alienated himself from everybody in the family, and his twin brother wants to kill him. That's all you need to know. That's enough. He runs away from home with that. By the way, when he runs away from home, he's 77 years old. However, he did live till he was 147. So if you cut his age just about in half, because 147 cut in half is about the average lifespan today. So this would mean he's running away at about 38, which still means a long time playing video games in your parents' basement. He's going away from home at about 38, unmarried. His brother by this time has 3 or 4 wives. Brother's been kind of the one out in the front shock troops in more ways than one. He's single and running away from home at 38-ish. Verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. His mother says, "Go live at my brother's house until your brother isn't mad at you anymore." Well, this is gonna turn into 20 years. And set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. I've done a lot of sleeping on the ground. I have never used a rock as a pillow. When you're using a rock as a pillow, that's just kind of enigmatic that things aren't going well in your life. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob woke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Just a cultural note here that is helpful to understand this. Any of you familiar with Chronicles of Narnia?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. How do the Pevensey children get into Narnia the first time? The wardrobe, right? Those of you who are not familiar, never mind. But there's this wardrobe, they open the doors and they step through it and they get into this magical land. Now, that's actually based on beliefs that people had many years ago. That there were these magical places on earth where you could step into the divine. And they were called gateways to heaven. Culturally, this is what Jacob thinks he stumbled into. Wow! Think of that. This is where I chose to sleep tonight. It's the gateway of heaven. It's one of those spots where you can step through it and you're in a different place. True. And more truth to it. What if he had stopped 5 miles earlier? What if he had stopped 5 miles later? Would God have still met him there? The gateway of heaven is where God chooses to show himself to us. So culturally, he was aware of something, but not even the bigness of it, because God can step through anywhere, anywhere. Now, another thing to be aware of here is when it says in very first part there, verse 12, with its top reaching to heaven and its bottom resting on the earth, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Does this sound familiar? Did Jesus ever say anything like this? We won't take time to look it up, but jot it down. John 1, book of John, chapter 1, verse 51. Jesus quotes this and applies it to himself. Why? Because Jesus is that bridge between heaven and earth that ties these two together. He is the gateway to heaven. Wherever Jesus is, holds together heaven and earth, creates that access point to the supernatural. And Jesus says, on me, he is that stairway, he's that ladder. Angels, he says, will ascend and descend. That's how God's connection to us will be true, will be complete. So, this is really a picture of Jesus coming to Jacob. And then what does he say to Jacob? What's the very first thing he says to him? Look at, what does it say to him?
I am the Lord.
And how does he identify him? I'm the Lord what?
Abraham.
God of Abraham.
Abraham, who else?
And Isaac.
And Isaac. And that duet is going to become a trio. Now we talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, again, a rich heritage here of faith At this point, and again, think back to the lesson that Ken so aptly led us in last week. How fitting is it for Jacob to be counted as part of this Hall of Fame of faith?
He hasn't earned it.
He hasn't earned it. He has just ripped his brother off. His twin brother wants to murder him because of the scam that he pulled. And he's running for his life. He's about as far from that hall of faith as you could get. And yet God comes to him and he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and you. And I'm going to do every good thing that I promised to them. I'm going to do it for you. What else does he say there? Do you see anything else there that he says to him? What does he promise him?
To his descendants.
A lot of it.
Wendy?
He's giving it to his descendants.
Yeah,
Wow. That means he's gonna have.
yeah. You're going to have a family. There's something over here.
Huge, huge descendants.
Yeah, you're gonna have this big
Like the
family.
dust of the earth.
They're going to be a blessing to everybody. I'm going to use you to bless other people. Wonderful promise. Okay, we have 3 others to get on to, so we can't spend a lot of time on this. So the question is this. Look at the story. Remind yourself of it. In this story, what are the evidences of grace? And what are the evidences of accountability? Are they both present here? How is God holding him accountable? How is God showing him grace? He's just really messed up badly. Is he getting both grace and accountability, or only one or the other?
Right now, a lot of grace.
Okay, he's getting a lot of grace. You want to give one example, Mike?
Well, he's messed up. You mentioned with his brother and all the things he's done, and now he tells him he's gonna be the father of a great nation, and I'm gonna be with you ever.
All those
You
promises.
haven't deserved it, but you're gonna be there.
All those promises are for you. Yes, please.
Accountability, he had to leave his home and his family.
Oh,
He doesn't know it yet, but he will never see.
he will never see his mother again. Well, there is some accountability here. He's alone. That isn't easy. Ken?
I think it's good for Christians to understand this was given to him and he didn't earn it. He didn't have to earn it.
No.
It's a gift. It's free. No strings attached at first.
It's a gift. So I hand over to you.
Well, again, he doesn't know it, but he's gonna have to have the consequences or learned from he's gonna get cheated himself. He cheated.
So there's some accountability coming. We'll look at that in a minute.
Karma or whatever you wanna call
Karma,
it.
okay? Christian karma, yeah.
He was given grace. He was given grace as a choice of that. But he did respond.
He responded pretty well here. He says, God, I'm gonna make a vow to you of loyalty to you. Good. Okay, we're gonna move on. Much more we could look at here. This is a rich, rich story. But would you catch this much? Love the way you said it. He didn't earn this. He didn't even ask for it. Oh, I'm sorry. We've got 2 more hands here. Hang on just 1 second. But God comes to him and he says, I am for you. I've got your back. I'm with you. I'm here right now. That's an incredible, incredible gift. And I've got your future. Amazing. And that's what God did to Jacob in that moment. Let's take these 2 hands quickly, and then I missed where they were.
Did Jacob honor his mother by doing what she told him to do?
I don't know. Good question. Did Jacob honor his mother?
We spoke on wisely.
Numerous things. I just given me grace for. So thankful.
Yeah. Did you all hear John? He says there are things that God has forgiven him for and given grace for, but he's still paying the consequences. You know, I see that on my own life. Lorraine and I were visiting last night, and I realized that there are ways that I lived and behaved and thought, especially in my 20s, 30s, into my early 40s, that I see consequences, some sad consequences in our family. And I am grateful that my kids like me. I really am. I'm grateful that Lorraine likes me. But that does not erase some of the consequences in their lives, in our relationships, of some of the choices I made that were particularly at that point very heavy-handed, very authoritarian. I was so overcome with this responsibility of being a pastor at 23, that there were things I felt like I needed to make sure that my family towed the line on so that they wouldn't embarrass me. Those weren't helpful. Yeah. Okay, Gordon.
Well, I'm trying to recapture it, but when you look at this, what always strikes me about this kind of a situation is, why did God pick him? What?
Good question.
Why did God
Yeah.
pick John the Baptist?
Yep.
Any better.
No one.
Yep, good question. Why did God pick these people? I don't know. We're gonna move on. Good question, though. Okay, we've got 3 more to cover here and lots of ground to go before we're done with this lesson. And I want to make sure we apply it to ourselves. Okay, so Jacob travels, probably took him several months to get to Uncle Laban's house. When he gets there, he immediately falls in love with his first cousin. Don't worry about it. They did marry first cousins in those days. He never met her before, falls in love with her, and he wants to marry her. So let's jump into the story here in verse 14. Then Laban said to him, "You're my own flesh and blood." This is Uncle Laban, his mom and brother. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, did you work for me for nothing? Tell me your wages. Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." Look at verse 20. Verse 20 covers 7 years in one sentence. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Now, that was in one sentence, 7 years. So what I want to have look at here in this I'm doing is the first 7 years.
Homer.
Now remember, there's 13 more to go. But those first 7 years, these with Uncle Laban, went like that. Why?
He was in love.
And he stayed in love for 7 years. It wasn't just, fleeting thing. And they just went like that for him. Here's what I want you to reflect on. This was the days before rapid communication. In fact, so far as we know, there was no communication. There could have been possible traders going back and forth and maybe getting some general news, but they didn't have regular mail service and so on. So for 7 years, he is alienated from his home. He's starry-eyed with love. He's probably not thinking a lot about home. But there is a sense in which you can't forget your childhood family. And as you anticipate starting a family of your own, marriage, there are things that are going through your head. And I know that we're going to have to read a lot into one sentence. But what do you hear in that sentence? What do you know up to this point? What do you think Jacob is experiencing? What's going on for him in those 7 years? What's he thinking about as he reflects on Esau, on Isaac, on his mom? What do you think is going through his head? What's going on for him for 7 years?
I think there was probably some regret.
Maybe some regret. Yep. Yes.
He's probably thinking, a whole lot about, man, I really had it made when I was at home with mom and dad. Had potential for everything. Now, I've gotta work.
Yeah.
Work?
Okay,
What's that?
so maybe the comparison between the ease that he had at home and the work he has now and him.
I can't help but to think that coming face to face with God doesn't hit his conscience every once in a while.
No.
And thinking how these promises are gonna come true.
Yep. In fact, I'll come to you in a second, John. All through Jacob's life, we're not going to read every chapter and every verse. But if you do read them all, the story of Bethel, which is the ladder, that's where the ladder happened, comes up often. And it was obviously on his mind, thinking, wow, God made these good promises to me. I would just guess that during these 7 years, he's probably thinking, wow, life has turned around for me. I am getting good things that God has promised to me. It says that this 7 years went by like that. And he was probably feeling like, hey, life is coming together. We'll come to Ken in just a second. Let's go, John.
What about this thing that started this whole thing? What is he thinking about his birthright?
Yeah.
What is that? How does that play into this?
Now, my guess, I don't know, but my guess is that's in the past. He's kind of moved on. I don't know.
I don't think I've heard this, but don't you think maybe Laban might have been a pretty good father-in-law during this time?
Might have been.
I mean, he's happy because it doesn't say those 7 years went by just like that, but he had to put up with you know who.
Yeah. Hang on for just a second. We're getting there. Okay, quickly. And I realize that you're having to build a little bit from imagination here. Is there any way that you would imagine he is experiencing grace here? How do you imagine he's experiencing grace here?
Was past, he didn't deserve anything.
Yeah, and I heard somebody else say,
Laban's treating him well.
yeah, so he has some sort of a positive life. He's in love.
He'll get the girl.
He's gonna get the girl, he thinks.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, he's welcome. He's with family. So there's some things, and it could be easy for him to say, thank you, God. All those promises that you made to me back when I was running away from home, they're coming true. Yeah.
He's got a vision.
Yeah, there's something ahead of him.
A
Thank
future.
you. He's got a future. He has hope.
That he's in love with.
Thank you. Okay. Any accountability here? You mentioned one, somebody. He does have to work. And so he's not just being given a free ride. So there's some accountability there. You want this girl, you gotta work for her. You have no money for a dowry, but 7 years will pay for her. It's a long time, by the way. Anybody else? Any other ways that he's being held accountable?
I like to think that he was in a process of growing in grace.
I hope so too. I hope he was growing up. You know, at 77 years old, you hope he's growing up. And again, cut that in half. This is from 77 to 84. And again, cut it in half. This is his late 30s, early 40s in today's parlance. Okay, let's go on. Our time is running out. We've got 2 more here. But let's look at the next story here. So this is the very end of this story, actually. So verse 19. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, and the then is obviously at the end of the 7 years. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to lie with her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah, enter ominous music. He took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her, and Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. When morning came, there was Leah. But Jacob said to Laban, what is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Talk about irony.
Good.
Why have you deceived me? That's my playbook. I wonder if he was connecting the dots. This is so much like what he did to Esau. Okay, So anything you want to add to this first 7 years? Carmen? Okay. Yeah. Does seem a bit like it, doesn't it here? Did I miss a hand over there? Mike, was that your hand?
Well, I just find it fascinating that a few verses back, it talks about the Leah had weak eyes. I think Jacob's were worse than Leah's.
Yeah, and we won't even go into all of that. There is something that, it's in the movie version of this. It is just priceless where they show the wedding and then they show the next morning and Jacob comes storming out of his tent. He throws the flags back. He says, "What?" It's priceless. I think that is the tone here. Okay, we're gonna go on to the next 13.
I feel so sorry for Leah.
Yes. Leah is really the victim.
Oh, wasn't she part of the plot? I mean, she knew what her dad was doing.
But I don't think she had any power in that society.
That's exciting.
I would love to get into some side discussions that we're not going to. I'm gonna take a drink of water, and you hold on. We're gonna look at the next story. Now, flip forward. We're gonna go forward 13 years, and you're gonna go to chapter 31. We'll come back and pick up some of the things. We'll go forward to, I just realized. I was gonna do 4, we're gonna do 3. We just gave ourselves some time. Flip forward to chapter 31 and verse 38. And we'll get to the context there, but this is 20 years from here. How old is Jacob now? 97. Okay, so think 48-ish. He has a big family by this time. He's got a dozen boys and a girl or 2. So time has gone by, but here's the story. He's talking to Laban. He has snuck away in the night. Laban comes chasing him down and several days later finds him. And here's verse 38, Jacob's speech to him. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams, from your flock. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years. I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks. And you changed my wages 10 times. The God of my father, the God of Abraham, fear of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and the last night he rebuked you. Now, again, we're missing a lot of context here, but do you get the idea of a really happy leaving of a job?
No.
20 years later, he is an angry man. About time I get out of here. First 7 years may have gone by like that. The last 13 years have been nothing but misery. That's the context. Now we need to back up and see a couple of things, both in his domestic life and in his work life. Turn back and see something in the domestic life. Chapter 29, verse 31. Well, we need to actually read verse 30. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. And again, poor Leah. He really does seem to be, in many ways, just the one on the outs here. And Jacob worked for Laban another 7 years. So he gets 14 years in, he's paid for his 2 wives.
What verse are you on, Doug?
On verse 30. 30 of chapter 29. Thank you. Now, verse 31. When the Lord, and again, my heart aches here for Leah. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb. Rachel was barren. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for he said, where she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Doesn't that just bring a lump to your throat? Now, we will not take the time because we're so close to out of time. But the story goes on with the birth of each of these 12 boys. And every time the mom names them something that says something about the miserable condition she's in, poking at her sister. Let me just read you one passage here. Verse 1 of chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" And then she said, "Here's Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her. Maybe you can bear children with her, and through her I can build a family." And I'm sorry we don't have time to read this, but you read the whole chapter and you get the idea. This was not a fun place to be. And these kids grew up with their moms in constant tug of war for the affections of the dad. And then you add to that 2 women so that you have 12 plus kids from 4 different mothers. It's a mess. Now, again, I haven't really given you the ammunition from scripture, but scan it over. And here's my question for you. In a phrase, how would you describe Jacob's home life? Jacob, I don't know if that's what you speak to, but go ahead, Richard.
Kind of, sort of, but what comes to mind is the sins of the father unto the third, fourth generation of them that hate me. And you can just kind of see this in the whole family as you even look beyond what we're talking about today. To Joseph and the brothers and everything that took place. The deception just continues.
So there's some accountability here that we would even say generational. Okay, so somebody speak to that question that I asked a moment ago before we go on to the grace and accountability. Give me a phrase, a short phrase. How would you describe Jacob's home life?
Just like the one he ran away from.
Just like the one he ran away from. Okay, somebody else?
There was deception in the family.
Deception in the family.
Dysfunctional to the tenth degree.
Dysfunctional to the 10th degree. Anybody else?
What a morass.
Morass.
Days of our lives.
Pardon me? Days of our lives, as the world turns, anybody else? Okay, you get the,
I feel sorry for Leah's, like, if he doesn't love her, how is she getting pregnant all the time?
he uses it.
Yeah, that's very degrading for all the women.
It is, it is. Okay, this is a sober, somber, sobering picture. Nobody's happy. And we know what this is gonna degenerate into, and that is murder plots against the favored little brother.
Earlier, you said Jacob had stars in his eyes. I don't think he had those anymore.
No stars in his eyes now, no. He kind of went in that one night, his wedding night, he kind of went from that to this very quickly. So there's generational here. What are some of the accountabilities? Realizing that professionally, and we'll see if we can take a quick look at that. Laban is wheeling and dealing and changing his wages 10 times in 20 years and always trying to get the better of him, which, by the way, Jacob matches blow for blow. So, yes, please.
I think Jacob took God's promises for granted to the point where it blinded him from how to actually live out those
Yes.
promises.
Those promises, which were so precious 20 years earlier, he kind of taken for granted. And would you say that that's a generation, I mean, that's an accountability thing here that God is, I don't know, harsh reality? Hard to say how to exactly summarize that, but there's some harsh reality setting in.
After that first night, and he came ranting out of his tent. Seems to me that right then is when it started, because he was blaming God.
Oh. Okay. So the consequences of his life, he blames on God. Well, did I miss a hand here? Much more we could look at, but we really do need to pull this together. I wish we had longer. It's a powerful story. We don't have time to look at all that goes on with him and Laban, but chapter 31 is all about that. Take a look at it later on your own. But notice what happens with this. Look at verse 22 of 31. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with me, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.
Which chapter did you read from?
Chapter 31.
Okay.
Chapter 31, verse 22. So before this encounter, which we started with, where Jacob is saying, 20 years has looked like this. God has already spoken to Laban, and Laban later tells Jacob about it. Now, again, we're skipping over all here, but could I suggest that even here, God has Jacob's back. He is not going to let him get mowed down by his father-in-law. And even in this moment, and we can look at other things, God is saying, Jacob, it may not feel like it, but I'm following through on what I said I was going to do. Got your back. And in the middle of all of this miserable stuff that's going on at home, and the miserable 20 years he's had, or 13 years that he's had with Laban, God says, I haven't forgotten you. I am with you. Evidenced by his message to Laban. Okay. Let's do a little bit of summarizing here. And then I want to turn to a passage about Jesus and wrap it up. And that is, if we look at this 20 years, for some of us of a certain age, 20 years goes by like that. Think back on either the last 20 years or a 20-year block of time. Can you identify with the ups and downs, maybe more downs than ups that Jacob experienced, as you look at a block of 20 years? And as you look at that block of 20 years, has it been likely that you've said, where was God in all of that? Or maybe you've asked another question, well, I saw God here and here, but most of it was kind of, who knows where God is? I was held accountable for stupid mistakes I made, but it seems like maybe I got more than I deserved. You just reflect on that for a minute, because this story is an archetype of our story. How do we reflect on big blocks of time, like a 20-year block of time, where it seems like life comes apart at the seams? And at the end of the 20 years, you're ready to rant at somebody and say, this is not what I bargained for. Doesn't even seem like what God promised me. You've been a big part of it. Made life miserable for me. You just get the emotion of that. And then say, okay, here on the night before he meets his father-in-law, God comes to Laban. He says, you watch out. I'm on Jacob's side. I got his back. Watch out what you do to him. That's an amazing piece of grace that reminds us clear back to the ladder. Okay, you had your hand up, John.
So, what does this story mean? I'm no different than Jacob. Still paying for things. Biggest mistake. So that and I had, even though I disobeyed God in the thing and he does not condone what I did, that he will accomplish this.
You all hear John?
No.
No.
John's just saying he could really identify because some of the same sort of things has happened. He's made big mistakes. He's had to pay for them, but he's seen God working in his life through that. Very true. One more, please.
I think as we look at the ups and downs throughout life, I think the God's promises. And I think there's an expectation with those promises, but among those promises, I love that it says he will be with you when you walk through the water.
Yes.
That there's not
When
the
you walk through the
absence
water.
of waters, that he's with you and he delivered good on his promises. But he had to walk through some fierce
He
waters.
did. He had to go through some fire, he had to go through some floods, and God was with him. Thank you. Well, I want to wrap up with this. It's a story that may seem very unconnected, but I wanted you to see one story of Jesus. Jesus, remember, is the ladder, and he's the one that pulls together heaven and earth. He also pulls together grace and accountability. I want you to see this in a story, and it's in all four Gospels. It's in the Synoptics and in John, but we're going to look at it from John chapter 12. And here's the story in John chapter 12. Verse 1. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, John does not say this explicitly. The Synoptics do, and Luke in chapter 7 is the most explicit, saying this was a woman who had been forgiven much. She was known as a sinful woman, and she'd been forgiven much. Luke 7 especially said that, but Matthew and Mark also. But, and John doesn't say it. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. What do you see in this story of Jesus? Grace and accountability.
He didn't strike him dead.
Didn't strike him dead. 2 days later, he's actually going to wash Judas's feet. How does he hold Jacob, or how does he hold Judas accountable? He confronted him. You're not getting away with that. I'm going to go on record here defending this person that you have just maligned. What else? Grace and accountability. Please.
He was dipping his hands. Oh.
He could have. He didn't. Yeah.
Barely extending great grace. Woman.
Yeah. Great grace to this woman. Jesus was a master. I think there's one more hand and then I'll wrap up, please.
Well,
And,
it was obvious that he had forgiven her.
yeah. Yes.
So Judas.
No, exactly. So much more we can reflect on here. Let's end with this. Grace and accountability are not hostile to each other. Jesus shows in this one story that he can hold people accountable and he can show grace. And he can show grace and accountability to the same person in the same moment. I want to experience that from Jesus. And I want to learn to give that to others. And in the story of Jacob, which we have 2 more lessons on, we're going to see more of this played out. We're going to look at other factors, but keep this in the back of your mind. That here is a story of us and our lives. And we've just looked at this one big chunk of time. And we said, how is God at work there? He is, even when we can't see it. I imagine that all through the birth of those 12 kids, Jacob had no clear sense of God's presence. There was probably just this, I can't take this any longer. How long is this going to go on? Yeah, God is there. God is working in his life. I encourage you, if you don't see God at work in your life right now, don't despair. He is on your side. He has your back. He'll walk you.
Now we're. A couple of things I want to say. Will you please move back to Chattanooga? Please. I teach this class every week. I've been a Laban so many times. I have a development near the mall and, there's a street that has been paved, but nothing's built on it. It's become a place for drug deals, drinking, for all kind of things that I don't like. I hired a policeman off duty to come out there. And recently I was driving by that dead end street and I saw this old truck park and the door opened, beat up old pickup. So like Laban, I go chasing after it and I catch it. I pull up to the truck and there's an older black man there, kind of leading, hiding between the door and the truck, facing the woods. And I look at him and his pants are wet. His shoes are wet. And all of a sudden, instead of tearing him into, I guess there is a God, I said, hey, what's going on? Call me, sir. He said, sir, he's like ancient. He's old. He said, all right, just can't control my blood. Times does this have to happen to me? No, sir. He keeps, no, sir. I said, well, do you need some help? No, sir. No, sir. I just need a little time. You know, if we could think before we act sometimes, maybe the Labanitis would not come out of us. What time is the potluck? Remind me.
After last service.
1:30. Can't hear. That's the time. Marge, can you handle that?
Well, I didn't know what time. I thought it was 1.
Well, it might be. Hey, I couldn't remember it was Mother's Day this weekend.
1:30.
Whenever you get there, Ken.
All right.
Immediately after the last service.
It's just after the service. Yeah.
1 o'clock?
1 o'clock.
Great. Don't forget. We want to see you, we want to talk to you, we want to visit. I won't act like Laban this time, I promise. Be a good boy. Tom, will you have a prayer, please?
Thank you, Father God and Lord Jesus, for this lesson. Good dose of reality and love on your.
Thank you. Be at 1, and Doug will be teaching again next week. And Lorraine will be here.
I will be. I'll be here.
Oh, Lorraine will, well, I got it half right, that's my life these days. Anybody that would like to get our email, we get list to get our lesson each week, Doug writes it, come see me, I'll put you on the email list.
Says one to the other.
That's true.
Started someplace else.
Well, yeah.